So one day last week I came out to my car and was going to get in and go somewhere, but soon realized that the battery was completely dead. Well, what do I do when the battery's dead? First thing I do is I open the hood, look at the battery. There it is. Terminals don't look loose or dirty. Everything's tight. Okay, did I leave something on? Did I leave the door open? Did I leave the hatch open? I don't know. Don't see anything obviously wrong. So I hook up the jumpers to my wife's car, which is right over there. They're long enough to reach. I hook them up and the first thing I hear is ding, 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 ding. The ignition was on, and then I realized the night before I was making a video and forgot to turn the ignition off, so the ignition was on all night and it drained the battery. So that's what happened. So some people, they listen to the radio in the car all night, or maybe you have one of those cars where even with the key off, the radio can stay on and you forget and you leave the radio on all night. Anything like that is going to drain the battery, leaving something on all night. So there are some things that do stay on all the time, like the clock. So this car does have a clock. Yeah, there's the clock. It stays on. Well, it doesn't stay on like that all night, but it does keep the time, and that takes a little bit of power, but not enough to run down the battery. A lot of people, I notice, they leave their chargers plugged in, and with today's phone chargers, you can leave them plugged in, and usually they don't run down the battery. But any relay that's on is going to run down. My neighbor has a kill switch relay, and I told her you got to turn it off when you get out of the car, because even if you're not afraid of the car being stolen, that relay is on, and if you leave it on overnight. And sure enough, a few months ago she said, my battery's dead. I said, did you leave the relay on? Oh yeah, I forgot about that. Right, so you got to know what you can leave on and what you need to turn off. So that's kind of the first thing you go through, and if you find something that you left on, then you know your battery's probably okay. You just need to jump it or charge it, or jump it and drive it and charge it while you're driving it. As long as you drive, a few miles, it's probably going to charge up again. And that's exactly what happened for me. So I got lucky that time. Actually, this battery's only a couple years old. But if your battery's more than 4 years old, let's see, it says right there 1122, so it's less than 2 years old. But if you have a little sticker like that, or a sticker that they punch out, sometimes it shows when you bought it, and it might have the warranty on it. This one I think is a 2 or 3 year warranty. So that's only the first step. So the next thing I would have done if I hadn't discovered that immediately is I would have got my multimeter out, and I turn it to volts. Let's see, it's set to volts, and this little button changes it between AC and DC. So I want it on DC, and I hook one terminal to negative, and I put the other one on here, and you can see I'm getting more than 12 volts, Actually, a fully charged, a new battery could be as much as 12.5, 12.6 volts, even though they call them 12 volts. When the alternator's running, it's going to be higher than that. It's going to be 13 or 14, maybe even 15 volts, especially if the battery is really low or is just charging hard. So that's the check I do. And then if it's low, if it's like 12 volts, less than 12 volts, then it's probably not enough to start the car. So then I'll put a jump. Now I'm worried that I left my alternator, that my alternator went out if the battery's not charged up enough. And I know it's a new battery. If it's an old battery, I might take the battery out. Actually, let's consider that first. Let's say it's an old battery, and I think maybe it's time to replace it. But I'm not sure. So what I do is I remove the battery. I take the negative terminal off first, and then the positive, and then I take the brackets off that hold it down. The bracket might be down below, and I pull it out, and I take it to here. I take it to O'Reilly because I know they have a nice battery tester, and I have them test it to make sure it doesn't have an internal short or something like that. Why is the voltage so low? Could have an internal short, or it could just be worn out. Well, that's what, when they get worn out, they get internal shorts, or they just don't charge anymore because the materials that allow the battery to hold a charge decompose over time. So that's just extra information. So I might do that first. I might, if I think the battery's ready to be replaced, I might take it out and have it tested. But if I think it's okay, or it might be okay, it seems to be okay, looks okay, then I go into more testing steps. So if I didn't leave something on all night and I think the battery's good, then what's my next thing? I want to make sure the alternator is charging it. Well, that turns out to be pretty easy. All I need to do is, if my battery's dead right now, I'm going to jump it. I'm going to jump start the car, and then I'm going to check the voltage again. Right? Again. And if, with the alternator working, whoops. Okay, it's still showing me about 12.3. The alternator has to charge the battery, so it has to have a voltage higher than what the battery had when the car wasn't running. So if it doesn't, in my case it's going to be about 14, because I know this alternator puts out about 14 volts most of the time. If it's less than or equal to, if it's not more than what it was when the car was shut off, then I know either my alternator is bad, or the wire that goes from the alternator to the battery to charge it is bad. So now I'm basically troubleshooting my alternator, and I can take the alternator off and take it to O'Reilly and have them test it, make sure it's bad before I buy a new one. But what I want to do first is I want to make sure the wire is good and it's and I don't have a blown fuse. Now, the fuse for the alternator might be in this relay box, but I checked my book, and here's my owner's manual, and I looked in there and I could not find a single fuse for the alternator. And there's even two boxes. There's a box inside, which I don't think the alternator fuse would ever be in the inside compartment, but there is another fuse. If you look in here, you see there, this one is actually under the glove box,
and I know there's no alternator fuse there, so I didn't know where the darn alternator fuse was. Until I was looking at the wire to see if I can trace the wire, and I see the alternator wire down there under this cover that kind of protects you from shorting things on the positive battery terminal. I noticed that this cover has a little clip here. If I push it in, oh look, I can take that cover off, and I look down here, and lo and behold, there are 4 big fuses, and one of them is the alternator fuse. It's right there. And so that's the wire from the alternator, and what I can do is, if I'm not getting more than the battery voltage up here with the car running, as long as I'm careful, I can put my probe down onto that wire to see if this fuse is bad. And if the fuse is bad, I'll get high voltage here like 14, but up here I might only get 12. Then I know here versus here, I know that fuse is bad, right? So I replace that fuse. So that's how you rule out the alternator. And it's a pain in the butt to get it tested. I know this one isn't too bad, but you've got to take a few things apart to get this alternator out of here. And always disconnect the battery cable before you start doing that, because that's a hot wire, and you can easily burn that fuse out or melt your tool if you try to unbolt that wire from the alternator while the battery's connected. Okay, so those are the easy things. Now let's say your alternator is good, it charges the battery's good, but every night, overnight, unless you take the battery loose, your battery discharges on you. Well, that still could be in the battery if the battery's old, like I said before. But if the battery's not old and it tested good, especially if it tested good at O'Reilly's, then what you have is called a draw. You have everything turned off in the car, but something is still taking power from the battery, and it's taking a lot. It's taking more than 2 amps. It's probably taking, because the car, like I said, the clock is on, and a few things are on, like the body control module is keeping the presets from the radio, and there's volatile memory in the car that needs power constantly, or you'll lose the battery. You'll lose those presets. You might lose any codes. You'll lose the time on the clock, and all those things go bad when you disconnect the battery, or the battery goes dead. But a normal car that doesn't have something else on should not drain the battery, because all that stuff is less than 2 amps. It's even less than 1 amp in this car. So I'm talking about amps now. I'm talking about current going out of the battery overnight while it's just sitting here. And how can you test that? Well, I happen to have this little 30 amp tester, and I'm not sure how much the ignition, it probably wasn't taking that many amps. But if I go over the limit on this, I'm going to burn this fuse, and then, well, then I'll have to get moving. I have to be careful that I don't overdo it with this tester. Like, I'm not going to test the starter circuit with this tester, because I know the starter takes, cold cranking amps, 200 or something, right? Close to that. So, but I'll be able to test for a draw using this little tester. Now, if I didn't have this, what I used to do is I used to go in the fuse box, and I would here I'm leaving. Actually, before I do that, first I'm gonna test. I'm gonna see all of the power that's going out of the battery by disconnecting the battery here on the negative side, because that's the safe side to work on. I take that off, and then I put my ammeter between the terminal and the cable. So let me show you what that looks like. Just a second. Before proceeding to the draw test, please make sure you have a charged battery in the car, or connect jumper cables, whatever it takes to get power in the car to do the draw test. Okay, now I have my amp meter going between the battery cable and the battery terminal, and it's reading 1/2 amp. So that's pretty normal. That's just the clock. Okay, now that I've disconnected my battery, guess what's going to happen? I'm going to have to reset my clock and my radio presets, and not sure what else, I can't remember. So yeah, just remember you're gonna have to do that after you run this test. But what I found is that I don't have much of a draw now. If I accidentally left my door open overnight, then let's see, how much would I be reading on here? Oh, I'd be reading 4.2 amps. Okay, so and I was going to say, if I didn't have this neat little tester, which I love, what I could do is I could rig up. Well, first of all, I can tell just by touching this. Do you see the sparks? Okay, I hear a relay comes on every time I touch this, and you can see a little spark. So I could just use the spark as a test to see how much current. I don't know exactly, but I know it's more than 1/2 amp that's going to make a spark like that. Or I can go get a, let's say a tail light, and I can solder some leads on the tail light, and I can put the tail light between here and here. Again, just kind of bolt it on to the cable and maybe clamp it on, use an alligator clamp or something to put it on the battery, and whenever current flows through that tail light, whatever light I have there, it's going to tell me that there's something using power in the car. And if it's very dim, then maybe it's just the clock, right? Because 1/2 amp will light the tail light, but not very much. But if I left the door open, then it's going to be brighter. And if there's something really bad that's shorted out in the car, it's going to be very bright on that light. So I can do it with a light if I have a light, or I can just do the spark thing. I can just see how big the spark is, but that's very crude. I would much rather have a tester that's telling me. And then what I'm going to do is, if I don't know that my door is open, because I've already checked all those things, and now I'm trying to find out, okay, well, there's something else wrong in my car, and I'm looking for where is this current going. I've got to figure out first which circuit it is. Look at all those fuses. And you saw in my book I have another box inside the car, and it could be any one of those. Could also, well, it's the ones that get power all night. So when you look in your book, look for the ones that say hot all the time. it's going to be a certain row that's hot all the time, and the other one is accessory row, right? It could even be a relay that's stuck on, and that's going to be difficult to find. But what I do is this tester sort of fits in where the fuses come out. So I take the fuses out one at a time, and I put this tester in where the fuse was, and then it tells me if there's any current. And if there's none, then I check that one off. So let's say I make a picture of my manual that has this. I can check off each one that looks okay, and then I can mark the ones if something has, you know, an amp or anything more than half an amp. I'm going to mark that down in my book. That one has an amp or whatever. If it has 5 amps, I'm going to stop immediately and say, okay, that's the bad one. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to go somewhere, maybe online, somehow find the wiring diagram for that circuit, and I'm going to troubleshoot that circuit. I'm going to trace the wire, I'm going to check the relay, pull out the relay first if it has a relay on that circuit, or I'm going to do whatever I need to locate it. And let's say it's just the radio. So the radio was drawing down my battery every night for some reason, even though I have it turned off. I'm going to just pull that fuse out and leave it out until I really want the radio again, and then maybe I'll troubleshoot more, because I got to take the radio out of the dash really to test it and see if it's drawing current, or if it's just a wire that's rubbed up and lost its insulation and is shorting somewhere. Those are kind of hard to find sometimes. So but I'm down to the point of I'm troubleshooting an individual circuit at this point, and I don't have any of your diagrams. I don't even know what your car is. So I'm going to have to leave that up to you, and if you can't figure it out, then call a mechanic, one that's good with electrical parts of the car, and ask them to, we'll tell them what you found. This circuit or whatever is drawing current, and it's eating the battery every night. So please find out what's wrong with that circuit. That's kind of what you have to do. So thanks for watching. Take care.